Shockwaves reverberate around Pakistan after a landmark decision by the Supreme Court to scrap an amnesty law on corruption. Is the country plunging into further legal and political turmoil? And does the decision signal yet another standoff between judiciary and government? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Imran Garda. Pakistan's Supreme Court has agreed to hear appeals from politicians facing corruption charges. Well, it follows the lifting of an amnesty covering ministers and senior politicians that prevented them from being prosecuted. The law was brought in by previous President Perves Musharraf. It benefited thousands of politicians and senior figures, including the late Benazir Bhuto. She was herself facing corruption charges. Well, the law meant she was able to return to Pakistan and start campaigning for office without fear of arrest. Well, now over 250 cases have been reopened. These include cases against Interior Minister Rahman Malik and Defence Minister Ahmed Mukhtar, who was barred from boarding a plane to China for an official visit on the weekend. The amnesty also covered President Asif Ali Zardari, but he's still safe from prosecution as he has presidential immunity. Well, in the streets of Pakistan, many people were satisfied with the court ruling. This is what some of them had to say.
They robbed the water and the natural gas. It's not the property of their parents. God gave us this gift to all of us. The government should give supplies of natural resources to all the rich and the poor people, whether he belongs to any religion. This is our right. They are stealing our resources, so if cases against them are reopened, it is good. If they hang, I have no problem with that.
The decision which was made by the court is a very good decision for Pakistan and for the Pakistani people. So now, whether it is President Zardari or Rahman Malik or any big bureaucrat, if they are corrupt, if they have some charges against them, they will be held accountable.
The people struggled to restore judges to authority so that somebody could take true decisions. This case is an evidence of strong judiciary which can make neutral decisions without any fear.
Well, joining us to discuss this further from Manchester, we're joined by Amjad Malik, the chair of the Association of Pakistani Lawyers in the UK, and from Brighton, Jeremy Carver, the director of Transparency International. Mr. Carver has advised previous Pakistani governments on anti-corruption strategies. And we did try to get somebody from the Pakistani People's Party, the PPP. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Nevertheless, we carry on. Amjad Malik, if I could start off with you. This has opened the proverbial can of worms, hasn't it? Around 250 corruption and criminal cases will now be brought back into the spotlights. But the question is this the right time for Pakistan?
Well, I think it's the weaknesses of politicians who could not cap the National Reconciliation Ordinance. The Supreme Court earlier in July sent this ordinance back to Parliament to decide the fate of it in 120 days. They couldn't cap it. They couldn't replace it with a Truth and Reconciliation Commission and a independent, unbiased, impartial, autonomous commission who could adjudicate the corruption cases and also give a law to the nation, giving a message to the country that they will not tolerate any corruption in their ranks when it comes to the matter of public purse. I think the matter has come to, unfortunately, to the judges, and judges have rightly took a course which is very popular, that public do not want to see any politician who is corrupt or who has any baggage on their shoulder. And I think this decision is getting widely appreciated only because of the reason that the judges reluctantly had decided on the core subject.
I'll tell you what I'm trying to get at when I ask you about the timing. Some big politicians are targeted by the judiciary. We mentioned them, the Interior Minister Rahman Malik, the Defence Minister Ahmed Mukhtar. When I ask about the timing, what I'm trying to get at is to ask, how do you run a country with all of this going on, given the context of Pakistan at this moment in time and the challenges it faces?
Well, you'll have to see if you want to run a government then you'll have to bring some sort of good governance in your government as well. If your ministers are carrying a huge baggage and are allegedly involved in corruption or previous cases, then you'll have to give a message to the country that you are doing everything possible in the hands of politicians to not only bring a law to curb corruption, bring a policy of discouraging corruption and malpractice, and also a commission which can judicate those cases and investigate and assess those cases. I'm afraid in 128 days given to them by the judiciary, they failed to erect a system of corruption-free, independent accountability, and the matter was sent back to the judges. I understand that due to war on terror, due to the current prevailing situation, it is very bad that it will be a setback to the newly born democracy in Pakistan, but it is the failure of politicians who left politicking but remained stuck in their small egos and couldn't bring a consensus whilst the matter was under discussion in Parliament.
Jeremy Carver, some voices within the ruling party have characterized these latest moves by the judiciary as a witch hunt, as a conspiracy against leading politicians. How do you view that?
Well, I'm not surprised that they should take that view, but there's no substance for it. The Chief Justice plainly has the entirety of the Supreme Court with him on this. 17 judges unanimous on the decision, and as your other guest said, that the court gave Parliament as much time as it could possibly do in order to try to produce something better. Your question is a good one as to what about the problems of today, but I think the answer is how much longer can Pakistan afford, and I'm talking really about the people of Pakistan who've suffered and continue to suffer so much. How long can it afford to have this government remain in power?
It's really interesting. I was looking at some of your own statistics from Transparency International, Mr. Carver, and you rate Pakistan 139th out of 180 countries in terms of corruption, 180th obviously being the most corrupt. That does suggest endemic and systemic corruption in Pakistan, doesn't it?
No, I think that's a little misleading. I've been involved in helping successive governments in Pakistan to formulate the best policies to try to tackle corruption now for 12 years. And in that period, Pakistan has steadily climbed in terms of establishing better accountability, better record of more even-handedly tackling the huge, widespread abuse of power that had gone on in the past. And it was making real progress until the onset of this present administration. Since then, of course, the entire government has been turned towards subverting all that progress and turning it on its head.
Are you saying that President Musharraf was far more committed to tackling corruption?
I'm saying that President Musharraf is more committed. Yes, President Musharraf was undoubtedly much more committed from about 2001, 2002. He was clearly realized that corruption was a major problem in Pakistan, and that if Pakistan was going to really improve and generate the sort of prosperity that the people deserve, that corruption had to be tackled and tackled effectively.
Amjad Malik, it's quite ironic, isn't it? Because when the PPP was in the opposition, it was all for a greater role for the judiciary. It sort of rallied behind Iftikhar Muhammad Chowdhury being reinstated as the Chief Justice. This was all when President Musharraf was in power, but the tables have turned, haven't they?
Well, I think their start was very good. Prime Minister came with the consensus of the Parliament, and he gave indications that he wants to run this Parliament with consultation and consensus. Down the line, I think they've lost the plot when the matter came for restoring the judiciary, as well as on the core issues like the trial of General Musharraf. and developments on the Charter of Democracy, which was signed by both premiers in London. I think that was their mistake, and they'll have to pick pieces if they want to retain power. I think the time is very short because executive is to follow the orders of the Supreme Court under the Article 190 of the Constitution. And if the government gave any indication that they are not going to follow the orders of the Supreme Court in its entirety, then I think that in itself will go give a signal that government is trying to be an accomplice to corruption, and it will be a very, very fatal charge. One more point, that General Musharraf, though came to rid corruption, but he was the very person who brought in 2 interior ministers, the predecessors of Rahman Malik, who were facing corruption charges. And also, it is funny that it was General Musharraf who gave this selective pardon national reconciliation ordinance, which pardoned almost around about 8,000 people of their criminality, of their corruption cases, of their looted money. And he had no right to usurp the people's right to hold those accountable who have plundered money from the public purse.
But do you think that that was the wrong decision then, to issue this amnesty and pave the way for the likes of Benazir Bhuto to come back into the country?
I think it was right for him to promote reconciliation, to allow the popular political leaders, who both of them are in the region of getting around about 80 million votes. I think it was a right step to allow those parties to see their leaders amongst them. But it was not his right to take away those corruption allegations on their heads. And that is the very reason that our current parliament is in a state where their decisions are hijacked at the hands of few people or few politicians who are not leaving their egos go away. That is why we are not able to see the collective wisdom of Parliament. Parliament couldn't adjudicate on NRO. Parliament couldn't make any decision in the Parliament which could have given indication that they are all for bringing those who are involved in corruption allegations to account and bring in a policy of fair, impartial, and unbiased accountability. At this very moment, we can't see. Parliament is defunct, and it is these leaders who are not allowing it to function.
Mr. Carver, President Zardari himself is immune from prosecution. So it seems as if these charges, especially those involving money in Switzerland, can't go very far, can they?
I'm not sure about that. How far President Zardari's immunity stretches, I suspect, may well also be in the hands of the Supreme Court. If there was something defective about his becoming president, obviously the immunity falls away. There are some big questions arising almost by the hour about the extent to which powers have been abused, particularly in recent weeks. Money that was frozen has been unfrozen and squirreled away into places that nobody yet knows. The Supreme Court is asking a lot of questions, and I'm not sure it's getting all the answers that it wants, but I suspect we haven't seen the end of this particular episode by any means.
Yeah, let's look at some of the permutations that might arise. Some say that while the government is not legally obliged to stand down, it has a moral obligation to the public. Well, Pakistan's government has said it will not resign in reaction to the court ruling. So what's the next stage? Well, the ruling is being touted as a challenge to a political system that's seen its politicians act with impunity. Even if the cabinet does not resign, it may be forced to change laws to tackle the corruption that is rife in Pakistan. And it's not the first time the judiciary has been at loggerheads with the government. In 2007, President Musharraf deposed 60 senior judges and the Chief Justice. That decision was repealed in 2008, backed largely by Nawaz Sharif and current President Asif Ali Zardari. This leaves the government in a quandary over how to deal with a damaging decision made by the very judiciary it rescued just a year ago. Let's go back to Amjad Malik. There's a lot of questions cooked up, aren't they?
Well, I think the immunity is also a dubious one. We are not very clear whether that immunity extends to the past actions of President Zardari before he became president. And how he became president, because he became president in the presence of National Reconciliation Ordinance, which was scrapped. Now, all at sundry are responsible for allowing him to elect, not only the establishment, court, President Musharraf, political parties, civil society, and the opposition leaders. Now, how we muster his ouster if he remains adamant to remain in power, despite his allegations on him, I think there is a way forward via impeachment. But for that, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif will have to muster his muscles and gather consensus and consultation with his other political forces like MQM and Pakistan Muslim League Q. And that is a viable and legal possible exit for Mr. Zardari. I personally think courts are considering the extent President is enjoying the immunity, but I think the right course of action should be through Parliament. If Parliament is brought in action to frustrate this question, I think then we will not be able to malign the judiciary with this political question. And the way out could be that President Zardari allows himself to a model president which was envisaged in the main 1973 constitution, a figurehead without any powers.
Right.
And Parliament enjoys that power which is currently is the remit of president. That may be the way out, but
right.
For that there will be a political settlement which is a must between political forces.
And Mr. Malik, we spoke about public opinion earlier. We got a taste of the opinion on the streets of Pakistan at the beginning of the program. It wasn't a sort of scientific census, but you did get the gist that people, by and large, backed these moves to fight corruption. I wonder at what stage will the people completely turn against the government? For example, we saw that Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani started firing those who implemented this travel ban on the politicians. Will continued moves like that cause a real public backlash against the government?
Well, there is a consensus that people do not want to see corruption or pro-corruption policies, law, or the people who side by the corrupt politicians. Now, when they will lose patience, will be a stage where executive and the government collectively give a response that they are not going to implement the decision of the Supreme Court. When they vehemently denies that we are not going to implement the decisions, or they try to frustrate those decisions, I think you will see a lot of public rage, and that may be the sole reason of the ouster of this government. And I foresee that political forces will join hands to topple this government in the Parliament. And you'll see very soon, the government has very little time to implement the judgment of the Supreme Court, and they are bound by the Constitution to follow the orders of the Supreme Court. At this very moment, public is not going to tolerate if the judgment of the Supreme Court is not followed and acted upon in its entirety. Now, when they will lose patience, I personally think they are without electricity. There is a shortage of food, sugar, now the gas shortage, and you hearing stories of sleazing funds, steel mill, land grabbing, and all sorts of corruption, pro-corruption stories in the media. I personally think people will start frustrating when they will see the action of the government which is going against judiciary rather than complying with their orders.
Yeah, interesting point you make there. Let's go to Jeremy Carver. Mr. Carver, the judiciary itself is not flawless, is it? I mean, there are a lot of things that need to be looked at with regards to the judiciary, with the blasphemy laws, the hudud ordinances, the anti-Ahmadi laws. So the judiciary itself is still in want of a lot of reform, isn't it?
Well, I'd agree with you that there's quite a lot of parts of the law in Pakistan that really are unsuitable. They were introduced for temporary political purposes to satisfy one particular powerful element at the time. And they do need to be straightened out, and some of the laws are really very oppressive indeed. The judiciary have, as you say, a mixed record. They've never been able to confront the fact that they are bound to be accountable themselves. And the first issue between President Musharraf and the Chief Justice was the failure of the Judicial Supreme Council to investigate the complaints against the Chief Justice. Of course, it went to a different chapter later on. But in a country that has had such bad governance piled upon bad governance, it's not surprising that there are some very weak elements in the constitutional setup.
Mr. Malik, do you agree that despite the flaws within the legal system and the judiciary, that it's still one of the few beacons of democracy within Pakistan in the context of things?
Well, I think before 9th of March, judiciary has a different track record. They've around about 4 times sided by the military dictator who came to rule the country in violation of Article 6 of the Constitution. But now we saw last 2 years a new pro-independence of judiciary move in the civil society and Pakistani masses. I think it's a good sign for an independent judiciary, but it should be coupled with the appointment of independent judicial commission, judicial autonomy. They should have financial autonomy and their security, and they should have a monitoring and accountability process under which judicial scrutiny is maintained. If that system is allowed to function, then I think in a decade time that judiciary will be able to play a role of a true monitor between provinces, government, executive and parliament, and army wouldn't need to come on the front, and judiciary will play that role to be that of a referee. At this very moment, I understand.
Sorry to interrupt you.
I agree.
Sorry to interrupt you. You mentioned the army, and something came up. The issue of the ongoing operations in Waziristan, the instability in the northwest frontier province, the fact that there's a Taliban insurgency with suicide bombings in major cities throughout the country. It's almost going back to my first question about the timing of this and the instability. With all of this political instability, how is the army's operations, the different operations of the army, particularly in the northwest frontier province, how is that going to be affected?
Well, I think army is part and parcel in this role, of the national role against the war on terror. I personally think it's the role of the parliament to address the concerns about the contribution of Pakistan in the war on terror. I do not see any change, any a major shift in Pakistan military's role towards that contribution, whichever government exists. But that can crystallize the contribution, the gains Pakistan gets out of this, and the contribution they make on political and military front. At this very moment, there is quite a lot of lack of legitimacy about the role of that contribution. However, coming back to the point that if
Very
judiciary
briefly, sir, we're running out of time.
is allowed to, if judiciary is allowed to function, that will pave a way for a transparent, good governance in executive, and in return, the matter will start going to parliament, ridding the people who are maligned with corruption, and that will be a good sign. But we must foster a parliament which debate the issues which are core to the heart of nation,
okay.
And especially, like my other guest mentioned, blasphemy law. That
Right.
is also the remit of parliament, not the judiciary.
Okay, we have run out of time, unfortunately. Amjad Malik and Jeremy Carver, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us from Manchester and Brighton. It was a pleasure talking to you. And thank you, the viewer, for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments, your suggestions or your questions. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye-bye.